Plot 1 is situated in the southwest corner of Norrbyskogen. Its daylight conditions are typical of Stockholm, with sun rising in the east and setting in the west during the spring and autumn equinox. During the summer solstice, it rises more northerly than northeast and then sets more northerly than northwest. And during the winter solstice, the sun rises roughly to the southeast and sets roughly to the southwest. During the darkest days of winter, the sun rises merely 7 degrees above the horizon. Around spring and autumn equinox, it rises a little more than 30 degrees above the horizon, and during summer solstice at noon, it rises 53 degrees above the horizon.
The plot can be divided into 4 different typological zones, one being the meadow, which is open but moist, one being the marshland, which is somewhat open in some places but mostly very densely forested, with a majority of the area being actually water, the thicket of densely populated birch trees in the southern southwestern corner, as well as the hill area in the northeast. In the forest, close to the meadow, which we guess used to be some sort of farmland, there's a crashed 1956 Ford Consul, which for some reason has been totally crashed deep into a tree, where the tree has, due to growth, started to merge with the car, and we were very intrigued by this artifact, this site here in the forest. The very wet marshlands was also quite a sight and an experience, and it surprises us that there were actually like 100% wet areas even in those parts which we suppose was some sort of forest pathway, like here where the car we has taken a stroll to, presumably from the crashed 1956 Ford Consul. Having been quite appalled by the wetness of the marshlands, and a little disappointed in that the meadow was, with its moisture, so hostile to human dwelling as well, we were very glad when we saw, walking on the pathway from the east to the north here, when we saw this outcrop just appearing, soaked by the daylight. It is our intended placement for the building.
The topography of the plot is a little unbalanced in curvature, with most of the area being almost completely flat, namely in the marshland and meadow areas, but rising up to the outcrop in the northeast corner, as well as a similar topography in the center northern part, but which is very densely forested. It is in the transition between these different zones that we get the most slope, of course. The average slopes in our 4 sections of the landscapes ranges from 7% to 19% of average slope, with the maximum slope being 78% in the CC section. Not the Caesarean section, but the CC section.
During the 60s, we presume that now it's an overgrown meadow, very wet and moist, but we presume that this area in the northwest corner of our plot, that it was used as some sort of farmland. If one would interpret the lines visible traversing the field perpendicularly, one could also assume that this is why the car was found in the part of the forest close to the perpendicular road there. Nevertheless, the car has actually crashed into the tree from the south, so one might not be able to reconstruct the actual route that it took before crashing into the tree.
In 2019, the open farmland from the 1960s has been partly overgrown by trees as well as the surrounding foliage of other species. Generally, there are 4 different species of trees that are found on this plot: pine, spruce, alder and birch, as well as some areas which are predominantly open.
Due to the forest being densely populated with trees, the direct sunlight hours are quite few for most of the area on this plot, but there are 2 or 3 general areas where this pattern is broken. In the northwest, there is a meadow, an open meadow. In the northeast, there is an outcrop. And in some spots between these 2, there are less densely forested areas as well. During our expedition to the site, we found that the outcrop in the northeast corner of the plot was ideal due to being a recipient of daylight thanks to its open character on the outcrop, as well as being sufficiently distant to the overly moist marshland below. We captured an HDRI on the outcrop, evaluating the light intensity and the characteristics of the light. And we found that the lighting during this particular day, with this very overcast weather, and during this particular hour, it was extremely neutral. We found that the balanced exposure value was 8.95, and EV9 is understandable as the intensity of daylight without direct sunlight. So we had a almost perfectly overcast day. And we also found that the white balance of the emitted daylight was extremely neutral as well, with 5400 Kelvin being the reference value for the white balance of daylight in the northern hemisphere not contributed by sunlight. But on this location, on this outcrop high up on the hill, we found great inspiration in being reconnected to the sky after having been wandering in the very densely forested foliage below. Due to the heavily trafficked road, 106 meters from the plot border, we have some significant noise pollution, actually all over the place, but most significantly in the southern parts of the plot. It comes as no surprise that the more dramatic topography of the northeastern corner of the plot has more significant flow of rainwater, according to our simulations. Whereas the marshlands and the very moist meadow, as well as the equally moist thickets, these areas have much less rainwater flow and are thus accumulating more water and moisture.
When we traversed the area around the plot, we also experienced how our socks were getting very wet in the wetlands, not being very dry in the meadow either. But going upwards in the topography, especially rising up to the outcrop region in the northeast corner, we found that our socks were not getting more wet anymore. Having primarily taken into account that this plot has two areas that has immediate access to direct sunlight, the meadow in the northwest and the outcrop in the northeast, as well as the factor that the meadow is, while less moist than the wetlands in the southeast, still very, very wet. We proposed that the intended placement for the building is on the outcrop in the northeast corner of the plot.
Coming up with a design for the building, we were primarily interested in two things. One being the total 1956 Ford Consul, the remnant of an era lost, as well as some sort of pseudo-eternal artifact, so very alien in this natural forest, and yet somehow one feels that it is precisely here one would find this sort of old Ford. We were inspired by this car wreck.
The other thing that inspired us was the fact that when we got up on the hill and stood on the outcrop, we had access to the sky again. And what we felt up there was that it would be a comparatively ideal place to position a sort of stargazing infrastructure, as well as combining this, of course, with the dwelling purpose of the assignment. And thus we thought perhaps we could design a small observatory with overnight dwelling accommodation, so that you could venture into the forest, you could go into this small building, you could sleep perhaps during the early evening, and then you could wake yourself up with an alarm in the small hours, and then you could go up to the top floor and look into the telescope and you could stargaze. Our sketch process took immediate reference to the 1956 Ford Consul and the general car design paradigm of this time, while progressively incorporating more and more of the stargazing aspect into the design.
What we try to envision is this some sort of mini observatory, giving the impression that it has landed here for observation to the purpose of stargazers, and due to the fact that this part of the outcrop is approximately flat, it could be with or without a concrete platform or 4 sets of smaller concrete platforms. It could be like lifted in from the factory to the location with a helicopter of some sort and just allowing it to gently touch ground and be positioned here for stargazers to come here and experience the night sky.